Anyone who says Hollywood needs to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in order to make a big effects driven movie, I'd like to point to Godzilla Minus One, because this is a movie that's actually doing pretty well within the US, becoming the highest domestic opening for a live action Japanese movie. And it was able to briefly hit the #1 spot at the domestic box office overall, becoming the first foreign language film to actually achieve such a goal in nearly 2 decades. The film is also getting a lot of praise not only amongst critics but also audiences. As of the time of this recording, it's currently sitting at a 98% on Rotten Tomatoes for audiences and a 97% for critics. All of this for a movie with a production budget of only $15 million. It's this ridiculously low production budget for a movie of this scale that really got my attention for this story, because I didn't think you could actually make a big movie off of that kind of budget. Now, I knew Hollywood budgets were grossly overinflated, but is it so much so that you can make a Godzilla movie off of $15 million? Well, the answer is kind of yes and no. And here's what I'm talking about with this, because I got this article pulled up from Collider that goes into a little bit more detail about it. And there's some stuff they get right, but further investigation shows that there's also some stuff they get wrong as well. You never see a project with this type of story or scope being made on this low of a budget, in North America at least. In many other parts of the world, Japan included, labor laws are put into place that keep wages much lower, therefore lowering production costs. Further down in the article, it does try to say that the large part for why the budget was so low was because of the wages in Japan, and this is ultimately at the cost of workers and VFX artists. But when you compare the salaries of a VFX artist working in Los Angeles versus one working in Japan, you'd find in Japan they're making around 55% of what one in Los Angeles is making, which is obviously significant until you start comparing the cost of living to both locations, and you would find that the quality of life between the two groups is more comparable. So all this really says is things are just cheaper in Japan. I mean, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I mean, yeah, they're making less money, but that's because they don't need as much money. But this article, I think, fairly does mention, though, that the only reason why this budget is so low for this movie isn't because of the cheap wages. It also has to do with the fact that the story focus is on characters first and foremost. It also helps that a large part of the story revolves around the relationship between human characters, particularly a father and daughter. Having a heart at the core of your movie is the least expensive special effects that any filmmaker can create. There's no doubt that Minus One resonates with people because of its focus on story and character. And that's really the lesson that Hollywood should take away from this. And I find people getting hung up on the whole wages aspect of this are kind of missing the forest for the trees sort of thing, because you have a good story and that's cheap to do, and that's something that audiences ultimately like. Because yes, the visual effects are the spectacle that gets attention, but the analogy I heard was the visual effects are basically like the frosting on a cupcake. I mean, it's nice to have and you kind of need it to complete the cupcake, but you can't have the whole thing be mostly frosting or all frosting. You need to have something else of substance there. And that's what a good story is. And that's something that can be done cheaply. And that's something that Hollywood needs to understand is you focus on the characters, you focus on the stories. And even then, the visual effects, you can still have that. It doesn't even necessarily have to be as good because, I mean, watch a lot of older movies. There's many movies that have kind of dated visual effects, but people still like them anyway. And they can forgive that because they still like the characters and they like the story. And that's really what Hollywood needs to focus on. And until they understand that, they're just going to be doomed to fail, and we're going to see more of this foreign movies coming in and kind of taking over the box office because it's offering them something that Hollywood is not giving them.